For my final piece, I'm going to read this lyric essay titled HiFi is in the Heart. It was published on the Asian American ex-Latinx digital cultures blog, but you can find a link to it on the Sunday Jump Instagram, right? Yeah. So if you want to follow along, please feel free. But yeah, this is called HiFi is in the Heart. When I tell people I grew up in historic Filipinotown, Los Angeles, they look at me with blank stares. I am quick to follow up. It's right by Echo Park. It's in the Westlake neighborhood. Ah, they finally say. I don't blame them. I didn't realize I lived in Filipinotown until high school, when my non-Filipino history teacher commented that as a Filipino family who had migrated to this neighborhood in the 1990s, we were an important part of Los Angeles history. Historic Filipinotown was a sprawling ethnic enclave in the 1950s. But before that, there was Little Manila in downtown LA, Carlos Bulosan's Little Manila. On Main Street, Filipino bachelors would gather at the Filipino Recreation Hall for a game of billiards and a drink. At the Biltmore Hotel bar, Bulosan would buy drinks for his friends whenever he sold a story. Clifton's Cafeteria, now a high-end bar called Clifton's Republic, was a popular lunch spot for many Filipino migrant workers. Before the cafeteria closed in 2018, I ate there with my former partner before they passed away. I shivered, thinking of the many ghosts sharing our meal. The disappearance of Little Manila is similar to the demolition of San Francisco's International Hotel and many other Filipinx ethnic enclaves. After World War II and white flight to LA County's numerous suburbs, the city of Los Angeles began an aggressive urban renewal program that uprooted Filipinx migrants and forced them to relocate to Bunker Hill, a community west of downtown. My alma mater, Belmont High School, sits by Bunker Hill. In fall 2023, Belmont celebrated its 100-year anniversary. Growing up, I did not realize how much history, pain, triumph, and struggle was rooted in my neighborhood. My parents rented a 2-bedroom apartment on Belmont Avenue. My 2 sisters and I shared one of the rooms. On weekends, we would shop at Temple Seafood Market and buy and fill my parents' shopping baskets with the goods. Jack and Jill pretzel sticks, roller coaster chips, Moo chocolate milk. My parents would select 2 fish from the seafood aisle and have them cleaned and fried for dinner. On special occasions, they would buy bicho, Filipino donuts sprinkled with sugar. As I crushed the sugar granules with my teeth, I momentarily forgot that I had to return to a 2-bedroom apartment. My sisters and I spent weekends watching movies of suburban white teenagers throwing house parties and drinking beer from red Solo cups. Because our friends also lived in similar sardine cans, we thought life in the suburbs was just a fairy tale. We didn't know any teenagers who could afford to throw a house party or constantly lie to their parents through their teeth. My mom knew if I went to the mall after school instead of a student government meeting before I even walked through the front door. Growing up in historic Filipinotown, people were surprised when I told them there weren't many Filipinos. By the 1980s, many of Filipinotown's original inhabitants had relocated to ethnoburbs, Carson, Torrance, the San Gabriel Valley. In the early 2000s, HiFi was only 25% Filipinx. Most of my classmates were Latinx. My peers would look at my Spanish name and Asian features with confusion. Why is your last name Vallarta if you look like that? I was also confused. They giggled at my silence before tugging the corners of their eyelids and chanting ching chong, ling long until I cried or ran away. Mom, Dad, what are Filipinos? Was I really Asian? Why was I not Latinx? My parents also did not know how to answer. They just told me to be proud. You should be happy to be Filipino, but I wasn't. My classmates called me little Chinese girl no matter how many times I told them I was not Chinese. At my 2nd grade potluck, a group of students refused to eat the pancit my mom cooked, claiming the noodles looked like worms. Even the teachers and school administrators were befuddled. My parents would receive phone calls and flyers in Spanish, forgetting my parents spoke English. Despite the bullying and racism, I did notice connections between my classmates and me. Most of us were the children of immigrants. Jay, a friend from middle school, was from Honduras and would go home every 2 to 3 years. My family would go to the Philippines every 3 to 5 years. We commiserated over the annoying international airports and gasped how different our hometowns looked every time we returned. There's always a bunch of new houses I don't recognize. My cousins forget me. I'm sick of reintroducing myself every time. We both spoke our native languages, but even fluent Tagalog and Spanish could not wring the American off our tongues. I told Jay that while shopping at the mall with my cousin, shopkeepers would approach me in English, claiming their products were fit for the States. Jay said something similar happened to her as well. How could they tell we're American? I had the dark hair, almond eyes, and Tagalog accent. How could they see into my diasporicness? By middle school, I was able to fit in with my peers. A friend from 7th grade, E, seeing how long and unruly my thick black hair was, busted out a ball of hair gel and glued my edges down. She lined my lips with brown liner and let me borrow her hoops. I looked like a wannabe chola. Years later, after learning about Chicano and Filipino zoot suiters in an undergraduate ethnic studies class, I laughed, seeing myself in those rebellious brown youth. I would go to school with a blank face and would wash off E's work before heading home. During lunch, my friends and I would sit on a flight of stairs, trying to look as nonchalant and menacing as possible. I got straight A's and let my friends copy my homework. We ate tortas and hot Cheetos for lunch. At the time, I didn't realize how multicultural my middle school was. My school was located in East Hollywood, another immigrant ethnic enclave that was, at the time, predominantly Latinx and Filipinx. But it was also adjacent to Los Feliz and Silver Lake, so many upper to middle class white kids went to our school too. Most of them were in Track A, where the magnet program was. Although my friends and I had yet to learn what institutional racism is, we noticed the preferential treatment the white kids got. Track A had clubs, like creative writing and animation. The magnet kids went to field trips and could join programs like orchestra. I joined a poetry slam in 8th grade, but most of the winners were in Track A and white. My friends and I were in Track B, which also had an honors program, but was unequipped compared to the opportunities in Track A. At least everything was shitty and equal at Belmont. My sisters and I laughed. Belmont High School was predominantly Latinx, but my classmates and I were reading books like The Scarlet Letter and Ragtime. School administrators held assemblies on how to matriculate to trade school or junior college and invited the U.S. military to hold recruiting sessions on campus. At lunch, my friends and I would hide by the auditorium, eating our shitty provisions and blasting emo through earbuds. A boy I liked taught me how to make a pipe from an apple, and later, a ballpoint pen. I sat behind him in English class, wishing I was the tip of the pen in his mouth. If you grew up in historic Filipinotown in the early 2000s, you might not be able to recognize it now. Many old houses have been bulldozed, converted into luxury units and condos for LA transplants. My parents' neighbors, who were in a notorious Echo Park gang, have left. There are numerous stories of Filipinx and Latinx residents losing their homes, having to move further south or sleep in their cars. In the morning, you can see gringos running in their Lululemon track shorts and walking their perfectly groomed dogs. They know this community as Echo Park adjacent. My parents are the quaint old Filipino couple living in a crumbling apartment building that looks like a creepy Victorian house. In 2018, frustrated by the gentrification in my community, I wrote a concrete poem called We Bleed Hybridity. The poem was later featured in Chicharon Chronicles, a HiFi walking tour that celebrated solidarity between Latinx and Filipinx communities. In addition to the poem, I shared my experience growing up in HiFi and why I keep returning to this neighborhood despite no longer being a resident. There are my parents, yes, but something greater keeps me tethered here. It is not the promise of acculturation, but the promise of survival despite the many forces that keep striving to erase, demolish, and uproot the people who make this place home. It is the promise of creativity and persistence as Black, Brown, and Asian youth come together to share music and poetry at Sunday Jump, a monthly open mic hosted at the Filipino Workers Center. It is my mother baking bread for the Filipino migrant workers who live together in a house next door. My father laughing in Spanglish with his neighbors as they fix their cars and share mechanic tips together. My niece, the next generation, who was raised in HiFi during her first 4 years. We are not just here, we are firmly planted. Thank you.